All right, folks, we are down to just days before a RNC chair is elected. Will it be the current one we have, or will it be one of her challengers? I have Harmeet Dhillon here with me. She's a nationally recognized lawyer, boardroom advisor. She is passionate about First Amendment rights and election law matters. And she's really worked her way up in the RNC from a volunteer to working with now vice chair of the California Republican Party. So I'm going to go ahead and bring her in. Here we go. Thanks for being with me today, Harmeet.
Thanks for having me.
I wanted to start by saying this is kind of full circle for me because when I was a news anchor there at Fox 26 in the Central Valley, we did a town hall about reopening the Valley, and you were a part of that. And I was so grateful you were a part of that because that was such a weird time as they were trying to shut everything down in the pandemic. And you were a voice of reason in that time and part of our panel. So it's nice to interview again under different circumstances, no longer under corporate controlled media.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, first of all, I mean, I was checking up on your bio and your experience with the RNC and your passion for being a Republican and conservative values, but have you always been on that end of the spectrum, a Republican and identified as a conservative?
Yes, I have. I started out in my household when I was growing up. We used to have fundraisers for Republican candidates in rural North Carolina, including Senator Jesse Helms and some others. And then when I went to college, I was a conservative student activist, including journalist at the Dartmouth Review, eventually became the editor-in-chief of that, and was featured all over the national news as a conservative college student and activist on the First Amendment. And so throughout my career, I voted for Republican candidates and been active in the presidential campaigns of the last four presidential candidates on the Republican side or nominees.
Now, clearly, you think that there's a change that needs to take place. That's part of what you're promising is bringing us in a new direction. So, at what point did you start getting disillusioned with where the Republican Party was?
Well, we haven't won the last several elections, and certainly in this recent election cycle, promising a red wave to voters and then grossly underperforming. That's really what makes me dissatisfied. And so, you mentioned a lot of my credentials. I'm a very active trial lawyer. I won several cases and during COVID regarding the shutdown. So I'm not looking for another job, but I'm looking for Republicans to win. That's really important to me because I think it's really important to our country that I love very much. And I'm very concerned about the 2024 election, that if we simply, quote unquote, stay the course and unite around the current leader, which is what she's asking, we're being asked to unite around failure. And we can't afford that. And so that is why, with a plan that I have to really jumpstart our election operations effort and focus on winning and focus on getting ballots into the ballot boxes, the basic mechanics of elections and less of the fluff, I think that's what we really need to do to win.
You've picked up a lot of endorsements, and a lot of the America First faction, we'll call it, of the Republican Party is fiercely loyal to you and has endorsed you. A lot of them were upset and felt like money wasn't allocated enough to help them win their races. And then I've interviewed Kari Lake multiple times, and gosh, that whole situation was such a debacle in Arizona. What do you think should have been done differently in that regard with those races and what we saw in Arizona?
Well, elections aren't won or lost in a couple of days, and it takes years to lay the groundwork to prepare the election administration system to be fair and be auditable and be something that we can rely on. And Arizona hasn't had that for some time under the now Governor Katie Hobbs. The Secretary of State, Katie Hobbs, ran a terrible campaign in 2020 and really decreased the confidence of voters in election integrity in Maricopa County. From those problems in 2020, you would think they would have corrected them and run a crack operation. And I have to blame Republicans in that state in the sense that Maricopa County is run by Republicans and Republican Board of Supervisors. And so they kind of run the show there. But they're not, as you said, America First Republicans. They, very much did not want, there were PACs being run against Kari Lake by people involved in the election administration. Katie Hobbs, who was running for governor, didn't recuse herself. And by the way, Arizona law didn't require her to recuse herself. And you have a switch to what we call a vote center model in Arizona, which means that if you're not going to vote by the mail-in ballot, which is a pre-printed ballot that fits exactly the races you're entitled to vote for at your address, they print a ballot for you at the vote centers that, again, you can go into any place in the county. The problem with that is that they never tested the machines that read the ballots, the tabulators, with the ballots that are printed on site. Instead, they tested them with the pre-printed ballots. And so that seems incredibly basic. It's the kind of thing that if, it happened in my office, I'd fire everybody involved. But you just fail up, apparently, in Maricopa County from running one bad election to running the next. But that's not free. What happens is voters lose confidence not only in the outcome of this election, but they feel it is futile to vote at all. And that's on Katie Hobbs for failing to address the issues in 2020. Now, what Republicans could have done differently is we could have gone in there and filed some lawsuits about this. We could have insisted on righting the wrongs that occurred in 2020 freshly after that. 2021 was a bad time because a lot of frivolous election litigation was filed by lawyers who didn't know what they were doing. And so, the very name of election litigation back then was tarnished for a period of time. But I don't think there's any excuse for us not adapting to, number one, encouraging voters to actually vote early. I'm a big believer in that. You can go in person and vote early in many states. And so you can, if you're worried about mail ballots, that's not an issue. But you can also claim your ballot early and get it in early, and then be assured through various apps that are out there that your vote has been received and it's going to be counted. And that's the model I think we need to be going for, because when Republicans are voting on one day and Democrats are voting for 35 days, which is the case in many states, we've already lost before Election Day, and it's impossible to make up that ground. And by contrast, Democrats are able to elect the most ridiculous and unelectable candidates by their machine that harvests the ballots, that gets the voters out there, that returns those ballots as early as possible. And that's how they have the confidence to bank the votes and they win. I think we have to, until we can, change the laws to laws that guarantee high voter integrity, which all mail balloting doesn't, because we have voter rolls that are bloated. We must compete with and defeat the Democrats at their own game.
Yeah, so basically play their dirty game. I guess one concern that, I know I have that other folks might have is I worry if I vote early or if I vote by mail that something will happen to my vote during all of that time. I feel like when I vote on election day that, okay, my vote is secure, they can't tamper with it, I voted on election day. What kind of response can you give to that concern?
I don't want to belittle that, but it doesn't factually add up. Voting in person in a polling place a few days before election day is no different than voting on election day. There's nothing more or less secure about it. Secondly, how secure was voting on election day in Arizona? It was not secure. It was terrible. In fact, the machines did not work. The ballots were printed on the wrong size and with the incorrect darkness on the paper. And so thousands of ballots could not be read in the polling place right there in front of your eyes. And the cost of that is that if there was an undervote or an overvote or a rejection of the ballot later on, when they trucked these ballots in violation of state law without the proper escorts of both parties and the police to escort them to the main place that they vote, by that time, the voter has been separated from the ballot. When you're feeding your ballot into the machine yourself and there's a problem with it, you can correct it right then. You can fill in a circle, you can get a blank ballot and revote. You can't do that when your ballot couldn't be read on site and it's trucked somewhere else. And so all those voters lost the ability to challenge inaccuracies in the reading of the ballot. And that absolutely could have affected the outcome of Abe Hamiday's race, which was within the recount margin, a little over 500 votes.
That's a really good point.
I think you're leaving it to chance to vote on election day today, because Democrats know that Republicans are more likely to vote on election day. 70% of the voters on election day in Arizona were Republicans. So if anything, you're a sitting duck. If you want to be smart, vote exactly the same way the Democrats do. You're more likely to have your ballot be counted fairly because they want their ballot counted fairly.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think that that could help with others that feel the same way that I do. You talked about this whole playing their game, and as you know, a longtime independent, looking at both parties, I am kind of just in awe of how organized the Democrat Party seems to be. I mean, they've got it down to when they go canvassing. I mean, they have the app there, and that tells how people voted and everything like that. And I just feel like this machine is so lacking in the Republican Party to get up to their level with technology, grassroots efforts. I mean, I can only think of one person off the top of my head that is working really working on this, and that's Scott Pressler. It's like we need a whole army of Scott Presslers. So
Yeah.
what do you think you can do with that?
Well, I put out a piece in the Daily Wire this week about what I would do differently with respect to the mechanics of elections. And it's very detailed. It's 2,500 words long. I encourage people to read it. I asked Daily Wire to take down the paywall so people could read it, and they did that. So it's very nice. Thank you to the Daily Wire for that. But there are no simple solutions here. There's hard work, and you have to invest cycle over cycle. We treat election operations like an itinerant crop of seasonal workers who pick a crop and then they have to go find some other job. They have to work at McDonald's or whatever in between, which is ridiculous. Democrats don't treat it that way. They treat it as a year-round imperative, and we have to do the same. We have to invest in professionals who perfect the methods that they can then use to train people on every aspect of the mechanics of operations. But let me tell you, in our party, of the $1.5 billion that was raised under the current chair, I don't see the results. I don't see the reinvestment in the states. 20% of those funds were sent back to states with a lot of strings tied. So state leaders didn't get to use those monies in the way that was most effective for their states. They had to use, I'd say, mediocre apps in many cases that were somebody's friend made and sold to the RNC, and everybody has to use that. It doesn't work sometimes. Our data used to be quite good, and results really vary at this point in different states and the quality of the data. So sometimes states have to scramble around. Why is that? What happened to the rest of the money? The rest of the money was sucked down by some very fat cat political consultants who literally were paid hundreds of millions of dollars at the Republican National Committee with no accountability as to results. They didn't get paid less if we didn't win the election. Success fees are not there. Officers of the RNC and senior staff don't get paid according to success. They get paid according to whatever lockstep increases. It's not a way to run a political party that wants to win. So I think a lot of things need to change.
As politics tend to do, they can get dirty. And so there's been some recent articles. I saw one from Politico about there's been some attacks on your faith, being, I guess, essentially that you're not Christian enough because you are a devout Sikh. And has that been cleared up? What are your responses to that?
Well, multiple people associated with the chair, in one case, somebody she appointed to head the Faith Advisory Committee, has told people that, they question my fitness to be the chair because I'm a Sikh, not a Christian. Our party platform clearly states that bigotry is not going to be tolerated in our party, and that's bigotry. That's what it is. I'm sorry to say it. And I heard it from another wing of the party in an attempt to influence the outcome of an Alabama vote on whether to support me or to support change or to support Rana for chair. And similarly, somebody who's been employed by the chair before spread in Alabama that I was not fit because I did a Sikh prayer at the National Convention. I'll own that. I'm a different faith than the majority of Americans, but our Constitution protects that. Our party platform protects that. And I'm the only person in this race who's gone to court and won 3 times at the United States Supreme Court through the nonprofit that I run to protect the right of Christians to be able to pray during COVID. I've protected the rights of Jews. I've protected the rights of just about every religion and gone to court to do it. So the idea that I'm not committed to religious liberty is ludicrous and offensive. And so it is pathetic that, I think it says a lot about a campaign that if you don't have something to talk about, like what you're going to do to win in the election in 2024, you talk about this, you call names. It's unfortunate, but I'm staying the course and focusing on what I think is the key issue here. How do Republicans win elections, which is going to be good for our country? That's what I care about.
Any thoughts on the other challenger, Mike Lindell?
Mike and I have spoken 3 times in this race. I think he's a wonderful patriot. His personal life story is very compelling. And I think he's a genius at marketing. The pillows and sheets and the like in my household are a testament to that. My husband is a lover of his products. And so, they're in our household. However, he doesn't have a background in volunteer politics. He has been a donor. So I take his input as a donor and a patriot very seriously. And so I think he has a role in the party. It's not chairman of the Republican National Committee.
I have to sneak in this last question. I just happened to see an article from the Federalist about how the RNC needs to keep Liz Cheney and her media allies from hijacking the presidential debates. And the article talks about how the RNC might finagle a way for a many would agree a not viable presidential candidate to make it into that debate. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I've heard the current chair say, that one of the conditions of participating in our debate is going to be that you must pledge to support the nominee. That might keep Liz Cheney out, but I don't know. I think there should be a level playing field, but we can't have a clown show of 17 people getting out of the little car. That's silly. That's not a debate. That's a series of prepared statements and a couple of zingers. So you can put criteria in place that are objective, like how much money have you raised? How many field offices do you have? Are you willing to agree to support the nominee? Yes or no, whoever that is. Those are the kind of objective criteria that you can use to weed out riffraff.
All right. Well, it looks like my time is up. Do you have any final thoughts on, again, I'm seeing a lot more endorsements as we get closer to the vote. Are you feeling confident that you have a crack at this?
I absolutely have a crack at this, and we're picking up support every day, and we're going to go into Dana Point in a strong position. And, outside the RNC, state after state, county after county, I don't think I've seen a single vote that favors keeping the status quo. So that speaks volumes. It's not even a close question outside the RNC. The question is, will enough members of the RNC do what the voters and precinct committee men and women and delegates in their states want them to do, which is vote for change at the RNC?
If for some reason we stay with the status quo, are you committed to being active in the RNC and working with Rana and trying to do things from that angle?
Absolutely. This is not about me. I represent the voters in California, and they sent 3 representatives to the Republican National Committee, and they deserve 3 representatives who are going to work hard to elect Republicans throughout the United States. And so, of course, I will continue to do my duty for the next 2 years as a National Committee woman during this term.
What's the best thing that we all can do to support your efforts?
Well, if you know a member of the Republican National Committee personally, that's the best. You can persuade them and call them and talk to them. That would be very helpful. At this point, I think the grassroots effort that doesn't involve personal knowledge of people is probably, I think it's baked in that everybody in the RNC knows that the vast, vast majority of Americans who are Republican voters want change. So more of that's not going to move the needle, but personal calls to people will move the needle, I believe.
All right. And if people want those resources to learn more about you, they can go to your website is Dhillion. What is it again?
DhillionforRNC.com is my official campaign website. Scott Pressler has put up a fan website called HireHarmeet.com, and that has some contact information on there. But I would ask your listeners to be very thoughtful, because some members of the RNC don't like to be contacted by Republican voters, believe it or not.
That's insane. All right. I think that's a good way to end it. Thank you so much for coming on with me. And I hope you have a pleasant rest of your campaign as we gear up and find out who wins.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the time. Take care.
Yep. Bye.